Good morning, and welcome to the Power of Restorative Justice Part 2, Practices to Support Students and Families in the School Discipline. We are very excited to have from Fairfax County Public Schools Miss Anna Laura Grant from the Office of Restorative Justice in the Office of Equity and Student Conduct. Um, we're very excited to have her here with us today, and I will pass it to her.
Okay, thank you, Nadia, and thank you everyone for being here for part two of this webinar series. I am really excited for today. I love talking about restorative justice and its connection to school discipline, and spend a lot of time in my role here at FCPS doing just that. And so look forward to your questions and your reflections throughout today's presentation as well. There will be different times in the webinar that I'll ask you all to engage and to put answers in a chat in the chat box. So please do that, and would love to hear what you have to say. I typically do trainings and um, yeah, trainings and workshops in person, not live like this, or sorry, not in a webinar format. So I really like to feel like you all are listening and participating. And so please make use again of putting your answers in the chat, and hopefully we can have some nice learning time together. So, as an introduction, my name is Anna Laura Grant. As Nadia said, I work in the Office of Equity and Student Conduct, but in the Restorative Justice Office, where I am the Restorative Justice Specialist too. I have been in FCPS for just over a year. I come from working primarily in schools. I was a teacher and a working in conflict resolution, peer mediation, and restorative justice, primarily in DC. So 12 years as a teacher, but 9 of those years out of school in DC, and 5 of those years working directly with conflict resolution and restorative justice in the school setting. After that job, I worked for the Office of Attorney General in DC as a restorative justice facilitator as part of their program to support young people who were committing felony level violent crimes, and bringing those young people committing those crimes with the victims of those crimes in this restorative justice process that we'll learn about today. So, you can keep that in mind as we kind of talk about restorative justice in the school setting. I really believe that this works in the school setting, but I've also seen it be extremely powerful with young people doing very dangerous things that have had a very severe impact on others in the as part of the legal setting as well. So, really anything that kind of makes the national, not, excuse me, not national, the local news, kids doing armed robberies, armed carjackings, group assaults on the metro, like those types of things, are the young people that we were working with, and we're engaging in this restorative justice process in a really powerful and transformative way. So, I believe in the power of restorative justice, and I am so excited to share more with you today. You might notice my colleague Chris saying he's the restorative justice specialist too. You can reach out to either of us. He unfortunately wasn't able to be here today, but he's an essential part of our team and of us implementing RJ, or restorative justice, in throughout Fairfax County. So, some objectives as we start our webinar today. For those of you who were in the first webinar, we are going to do a little review just for those of you who were not here in the first webinar. So we'll give an overview of what restorative justice practices are in FCPS. We will develop an understanding of how restorative justice is connected to conflict resolution and to school discipline. We'll learn about what we call a Tier 3 restorative justice circle process, and how that connects to the SR&R, the students' rights and responsibilities, which is basically our kind of document or big packet that all students have to sign at the beginning of the school year, saying like this is the agreements that they're making in terms of how they're going to show up at school. And it also outlines all the different infractions that a student might face, and the corresponding SBAR codes and what the procedures are for the different discipline incidents. So this is something that is publicly available on the FCPS website. Hopefully you've seen it as parents or caregivers, but we'll definitely look at how that connects to our Tier 3 process as well. And then we'll also reflect a little bit on discipline disproportionality and how that connects to restorative justice processes as well. So a lot to do in the next hour, but looking forward to our time together. I think we'll have about an hour of material, and then we'll have about 30 minutes at the end for question and answers. So please feel free to put in Q&A throughout the time, and we'll address those together at the end. So I want to start off with a scenario to make today's webinar really as practical as possible. So let's imagine that Alex is an 8th grade student here in FCPS. He is really angry at his teacher, Mr. Gonzalez, because he won't let him turn in late homework assignments and the quarter is ending. So Alex is feeling really stressed. This isn't fair. So he decides to use his phone secretly because, as you all know, phones are not allowed during the school day anymore. So he uses his phone secretly to take an embarrassing photo of Mr. Gonzalez while Mr. Gonzalez is kind of struggling with technology in their algebra class. Alex adds a rude caption to the photo. He posts it to a large group chat. And then the people in that group chat, they screenshot it and then they start sending this photo and the rude and embarrassing caption all over the place. So let's imagine this has happened and let's think about what kind of happens in response. So in terms of the SR&R, there are some possible violations that Alex has done by doing this, doing what he did. So, of course, he's violating the cell phone possession and policy use. The cell phone policy has been in place to a certain extent for a while, but as you know, as of this year, all Fairfax County students are not allowed to use their phones during the school day. So he's violated that. And depending on the administrator, because they have a little discretion in how they code things, the administrator might choose RB3 or BSO 12 around causing harm to a staff member. So I'm not a school administrator, but this is how a school administrator might think about like, what do I do? Alex has done this. The SR&R helps guide my decision making when it comes to discipline. So what has happened? And I know you all can't click this, but here there's a link to the SR&R. So if you know that maybe you signed it or your student signed it, but you haven't actually taken a look at it, it's very easy to find that online. You can just Google FCPS SR&R, and it has the updated version from this year, in addition to a bunch of translated versions, where you can find all the different infractions listed and what the appropriate responses are. So this is what an administrator is thinking, like, what do I do with this incident that Alex has done? So imagine that Alex is your child. And so I'm going to ask you a couple questions and I'd like you to respond thinking that, imagining that Alex is your child and he has done this against his teacher, Mr. Gonzalez. So go ahead and put your answer in the chat. So Alex has done this. How do you want your child to feel when they're involved in this discipline incident? They're going to get in trouble. Something has happened. Of course, he's done this um, harm to Mr. Gonzalez. So as he's involved in his discipline process, how do you want Alex to feel? And you can put your answer in the chat. Mhm. Thank you. Yes, I want him to feel like he's being heard and supported, responsible for his actions. Yep, safe and respected even though he did something wrong. Excellent. Yes, hopefully, of course, if Alex is your child, we want him to feel remorseful, um, to have a chance to be heard, but also again to be Remorseful, maybe to realize the impact of what he's done and how it wasn't okay. I'll just wait a few more moments in case anyone else wants to put an answer in the chat. Yes. So yeah, he signed the SR&R, but does he really understand the gravity of the situation? Excellent. Okay, excellent thinking. Thank you, everyone. Respected and supported. Perfect. So we have one more question for you. So what would you want Alex, your child, to learn when they're involved in this discipline incident? Whatever discipline process happens to him because of this photo and the harm he caused to Mr. Gonzalez, what do you want him to learn? And I'll just wait a few minutes while you put your answers in the chat again. Wonderful. Moving forward, they can make better decisions in the future, maybe how to handle his emotions in a better way. Great. What else do you want Alex, your imaginary child, to learn? Yes, how to respect others more. Great. That he was heard and he understands how his actions impacted everyone and why he has to take responsibility and take the consequences of his actions and hopefully even how he can manage his actions in the future. Very, very like thorough response. I love that. So he really needs to learn, I think, especially again, that impact that he's had, taking responsibility, and then hopefully not doing something again like this in the future. And I'll just wait a few more minutes or a few more moments in case anyone else wants to add something. I know if you're on your phone, it's not the easiest to type while you're participating in a Zoom seminar, or webinar. Okay, I'll go ahead and continue. Feel free to keep adding if you'd like. So we're going to come back to this scenario with Alex and Mr. Gonzalez in a little bit. But thank you so much for that thinking. And we're going to use this scenario to frame and kind of guide our understanding of the restorative justice process here in FCPS. So for those of you who didn't participate in the last webinar or didn't see the recording, it is available to you if you want to see it. But last webinar, we really discussed the FCPS, program overall. We talked about what it means to embody a restorative mindset. We talked about the benefits of what we call that should say tier 1 and tier 2 RJ circles in the classroom and in the school, and even how to use tier 1 practices at home for connecting with each other, like around the dinner table, or even for decision making, like what do we want to do this weekend? So all of those things are things that you could find and watch if you watch that first webinar. So we're going to review a few things that we did in the first webinar to kind of ground us as we continue our learning today. So want to start with our definition of restorative justice. So I'll read this one out loud. Restorative justice is a philosophy and a set of practices rooted in Indigenous teachings that emphasize our interconnection by repairing relationships when harm occurs, while proactively building and maintaining relationships to prevent future harm. So we can think about restorative justice practices as proactively connecting and relationship building. And that's really what we spent our time on with our last webinar. And then we can think about it too as what we do in response when some kind of harm or conflict has occurred, which is what we're going to focus on more today. So we will now watch a brief video that shows an overview of all of the tiers of restorative justice practices. So if you've seen it before, maybe you can, as you're watching it again, see if you can see something new or different. as you watch it a second, or maybe multiple time if you've been in some of our trainings, but want to make sure all of us are really on the same page as we start this. So let me click out of this and go to here.
In Fairfax County Public Schools, restorative justice practices are used to build community, foster relationships, repair harm caused by conflict, and prevent conflict from occurring in the first place. These restorative practices range from the informal development of an empathetic restorative mindset by staff and students to formal settings which include preventative community building circles, small group interventions, and responsive restorative justice conferences.
The benefits of restorative practices for students are that every student is seen, heard, and valued.
At London Town Elementary School, community building circles were implemented 3 years ago.
We have students now that we're in our third year of doing community building circles that are advocating to have, problem-solving conversations. Students are more comfortable bringing up problems with each other and wanting to have a dialogue with each other. I notice they're advocating for themselves, especially in the classroom.
Tier 2 restorative practices take place in small group intervention settings.
They're from different classrooms, but they share the same problem. And so with those, it's a 9 to 12 week program. So you have to spend the first part building that trust in that circle process, and then getting to the root cause of, why things are happening. And then by the end of that 12 weeks, hopefully we have strategies and ways to help.
Tier 3 restorative practices, known as restorative justice, are facilitator-led sessions that bring together those impacted by wrongdoing to discuss the incident, understand the effects, and agree on how to repair the harm.
Restorative justice is a formal tool that we use when conflict does occur that gives us the opportunity to intervene, to assess and to discuss what happened, the impact of what happened, and what we can do in order to feel like we can move forward and to repair our relationships in our community.
Twain Middle School and Chantilly High School regularly use restorative justice to resolve situations, repair relationships among students, and correct negative behaviors.
One of the most important parts of RJ is the students have an opportunity to talk through that situation and take ownership of their impact on that situation. Almost every time I know the students I've had worked through it, they'll come back and say, oh, this actually ended up really well.
The benefits is giving students a platform to be heard, and students are learning how to manage relationships in a positive way, and they need our help. And especially if a student feels like they could have handled a situation better, or if they feel like they've been mistreated.
It's a way for them to understand how it affects the community as well as how it affects each other, and to figure out a way to come to some sort of agreement on how to move forward. And this is all part of it, learning the empathy, learning accountability, learning reflection.
This is a great way to teach children the skills of how to get along. And once they learn it at this age, they carry it on for the rest of their lives.
Excellence,
equity,
and opportunity.
Okay, so let me close out of this and go back to our presentation. Okay, so hopefully again that gave you an overview of the various aspects of our program. And again, our first webinar really talked about Tier 1 and Tier 2, those community building aspects, but today we're really focusing on Tier 3. So as we engage with Tier 3 throughout the county, I just wanted to give you all a visual of who our central office team is. You can see me and Chris there, as we saw at the beginning, and our senior manager, Deanna, in the middle there. And then the other folks that are represented there are our central office team facilitators. They facilitate our most serious restorative justice cases throughout the county, and one of them is assigned to the school where your student or child attends. So they might be familiar faces, and if your student is involved in a discipline incident, they might be folks that you'll connect with as a part of that process, but that is who our team is. So we want to start our conversation re-remembering, again, for those of you who were here in the first webinar, what does it really mean to even have a restorative mindset? And how is that connected even to the Tier 3 process? So we talked about this last time, but the core beliefs and values of restorative justice practices are that every person has respect, dignity, and mutual concern, that we should have mutual concern for each other. And we think about restorative justice, I should say these come from restorative justice in education. So we're thinking about RJ being implemented in the education setting specifically. Respect means to be able to put yourself in another person's shoes and really see where they're coming from, really a strong connection to empathy there. That we all have dignity. All human beings have dignity. It's something that can't be substituted. And you have dignity even when you make a mistake and even when you cause harm to somebody else. And then finally, this value of mutual concern. We are connected to each other in our school communities, and even more broadly, really, as humans. And so what happens to you matters to our community. So in a school setting, I'd think about that again in the school community or in the classroom specifically. What happens to an individual student matters to all of us. Another key value of restorative justice practices in schools is that we do things with people rather than to or for them. So, really thinking, even in the discipline process, what does it mean to work through a discipline process with a student and not just be doing things to them, like doing punishments or consequences to them? How can they be involved in the discipline process so that it is collaborative and they are active participants, not passive recipients of discipline? And so we talked about this quote last time as well, coming from one of our key books on restorative justice practices in education, that it is effort and work, or can be effort and work, to really have this mindset that views all children as valuable and worthy of affirming learning practices. And you might think to yourself, well, of course, I think that all children are worthy and are valuable and should be able to learn and have practices that support their learning. And I think where we kind of trip up on our implementation of this, or of us living this out in a real way, again, is when we are dealing, especially with discipline. Do we really believe this, even when someone has caused harm to somebody else? When your child is the victim of that harm or has been seriously harmed? Or going back to that opening scenario, do you believe this too when Alex is your child, right? And responsible for causing harm to another adult in the building? So we want to, or we really encourage this belief that we are interconnected, we deserve respect, and we all have dignity always, even when we do wrong. And so we'll just reflect on this kind of personally rather than sharing it out, but think about, how do these values of respect, dignity, and mutual concern connect with how you want your child to experience school discipline? So you don't have to put your answer in the chat, but I'll just leave this slide up for you to reflect for a few moments. What does it mean for your child to experience respect, dignity, and mutual concern when they're involved in a discipline incident, in any aspect of a discipline incident, whether they have caused harm to somebody else or they are being harmed? Okay, so you can think again to yourself what your answer is and how this might connect to what you want for your child, no matter again what part or what their relationship with the discipline experience is. So we're now going to watch a video that really gives an overview of the history of restorative justice in schools. So I opened by introducing myself, that I was in schools and that I also had worked in restorative justice in the legal setting. So this video really gives us an overview of restorative justice in the US context, but then specifically its development in schools. And I thought this might be kind of helpful for you all to really gain a little more knowledge too, around how restorative justice practices have been implemented and encouraged across the US, in addition to in Fairfax County. So it's a short video, about 3 minutes, and then we'll continue. And let me try to, oh, here we go. I'm waiting for the little X to get out. And I'm going to put the closed captions on. Okay, and make this big, and we'll watch this one.
In the rich tapestry of human history, the concept of justice has been woven into the cultural fabric of Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous, and religious communities, laying the groundwork for what we now know as restorative justice. Indigenous and Afro-Indigenous communities have long embraced a communal sense of justice, rooted in the principles of community, relationships, and the worth of every individual. Similarly, certain religious traditions align with these values, forming the foundation of what we now recognize as restorative justice. 1974 was a pivotal moment when restorative justice found its way into Western contexts. In the Elmira case, 2 young men faced vandalism charges in Ontario, Canada. Instead of the traditional legal stream, a probation officer suggested they meet the individuals they had harmed. The meeting was a success, giving birth to Victim Offender Reconciliation Programs, or VORP, spearheaded by Howard Zehr, the father of restorative justice in the United States. VORP initiated alternatives focused on community, relationships, impact of harm, and healing. By 2000, restorative justice began making its way into education systems. School districts across the U.S., including in Pennsylvania, Colorado, Minnesota, and California, started implementing restorative justice practices division-wide. Support for restorative justice in education faced challenges with the advent of zero-tolerance discipline policies. These zero-tolerance policies proved ineffective and harmful, leading to a shift in perspective. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education recommended the use of restorative justice as an alternative to exclusionary discipline. With the guidance from the Department of Justice and Education, restorative justice in education needed to be established as a distinct field. Researchers began documenting their findings in texts like The Little Book of Restorative Justice in Education and Justice on Both Sides, Transforming Education Through Restorative Justice. There was a realization that restorative justice values could be integrated into education, supported by existing interventions such as trauma-informed care, PBIS, SEL, and equity-oriented initiatives. Today, 21 states and the District of Columbia have adopted legislation supporting school-based restorative justice. Major universities offer graduate programs, and numerous organizations provide certification in restorative justice. Restorative justice has evolved, finding its place in criminal and juvenile justice systems, as well as schools, fostering a culture of healing, community, and meaningful connections. As we continue this journey, let us embrace the roots and evolution of restorative justice, recognizing its power to heal, transform, and build stronger, more compassionate communities.
All right, so I will share the presentation again. Let's see. Now I would love for you to put your answers in the chat. After seeing that video, what connections are you making about restorative justice and its implementation in schools? Did anything stand out to you or surprise you in that video? Did anything kind of shift your perspective a little bit? Any reflections that you have, I'll give a few moments to put those in the chat and would love to hear what you're thinking. If we were live together, I'd ask you to turn to a partner and kind of talk about this with a partner, but we're not able to do that in this format, but would still love to hear some of your connections and reflections after watching that video about restorative justice in education here in really in the Western context. Mm, loving these reflections. Um, okay, love that some of you have personal experience. Um, very interesting questions, right? Around like, well, if a victim has to participate, does this kind of put like an undue or an unnecessary burden on them? Does this take away time from education? I hear those questions for sure. Yes, interesting to see a big kind of cultural shift from zero tolerance policies really at the start of the 2000s. And for sure, school districts have moved very much away from that. Yes, it's wonderful to kind of learn maybe about the cultural and traditional, foundations of restorative justice and indigenous traditions. Um, Yes, and I love this question around the effectiveness of restorative justice and what we would use in kind of the legal world or even in restorative justice research, the word recidivism, which means basically how likely is the person to do the offense again. So in a legal setting, if someone breaks the law, and if they go to jail, like what's their recidivism rate? Going to jail theoretically kind of changes someone's behavior. And so, how likely are they to commit that offense again if they go to jail or if they participate in restorative justice, for example? Really, really good questions here. Um, yeah, and that's right. Some students do have a choice. This is totally a voluntary process. We don't want to make anybody participate in this. And so sometimes students or adults change their minds about being involved. So love your reflections. And if we don't answer a reflection or a question that you have as a result of the video, please feel free to hold on to that question and put it in the Q&A at the end. But let's see if some of our presentation might answer some of those questions or kind of thoughts that you've got. Thank you so much for what you shared. So just to visibly kind of outline the history of restorative justice, really as the video helped us understand, these practices have been used in communities throughout human history. But it's really in 1978 that the first victim offender reconciliation program is established in um, Indiana, as we saw. And sorry, something on my screen changed, but I'm good. I got distracted for a minute. Um, and we've seen how this has been implemented even in other countries. In New Zealand, this is the way the juvenile process really works for all young people. And then today, many states, including Virginia, have restorative justice in their criminal codes. So if you remember the video, they did have a map of the states, and that was referring to restorative justice policies in education. And Virginia does not have any legal requirements or any laws around using restorative justice in the education setting, but it does have laws or policies at the state level which allow the use of restorative justice in the legal setting. And so, yeah, just wanted to highlight that and also kind of put what we're talking about in a broader context. Restorative justice practices in FCPS are not like a new trend or a fad that we're trying. They're really a part of a long legacy of using restorative justice practices throughout history, a long now kind of 20 plus years of using it within the school setting. And within FCPS, the program has existed for a little over 10 years. So this is, we're really talking about, we're not talking about a fad. We're talking about really a different way of understanding harm and what should happen when someone is harmed and what the role of the person responsible for that harm is. And so we'll look more into that in just a few minutes. So again, looking at the restorative justice in FCPS, this was from the first video I showed you. We have 3 tiers of restorative justice. The first webinar really focused on tier 1 and tier 2, the proactive things that we can be doing in our schools and classrooms to build connection and relationships, either whole classroom, tier 1, or even in smaller intervention groups for students who have some kind of shared experience. For example, attendance issues, or maybe they're experiencing bullying, or maybe they have challenges in relationships and kind of needing to understand what healthy friendships are like. We have some groups running around that. So that's really tier 2 is small groups of students meeting together for about 8 to 10 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks to help support them in their school. And then tier 3, which is really used for the SR&R violations like we talked about at the beginning. It's important to note it can also be used proactively. So we don't have to wait for students to get into a conflict or for some kind of like school rule to be violated or broken before we can refer restorative justice. So administrators know that, and I hope that you all as caregivers know that as well. If you notice that your child is involved in some kind of drama or there's some kind of like tension that you're worried about how the school could help support them address it before something bad happens, you can talk to your administrators about making a tier 3 restorative justice referral and having the kids or the people involved be able to sit down and talk through it before a discipline incident happens. And I'll just highlight quickly too that we have a partnership here, the Alternative Accountability Program. We actually partner with Fairfax County Courts, with Neighborhood Community Services, who I see is on this webinar, with Northern Virginia Mediation Services, with the local police departments in this area, for a diversion program for first-time offenders who are committing crimes on school property or on the way to or from school. These are nonviolent felonies, things like when kids like break into a school after hours and maybe vandalize it, or if there's a really bad fight at school and parents involved want to press charges against one of the students. If it's their first time getting involved in the legal system, they might actually be recommended to participate in restorative justice through the Alternative Accountability Program, which our central office team helps to facilitate. And so yes, today we're focusing on tier 3. So what is our tier 3 process? We briefly went over this last time, but wanted to highlight it again for you today. Some kind of conflict is brewing, or maybe an incident has taken place. An administrator, first of all, has to get parent permission or guardian permission. And once they have permission, they can make the RJ referral. Then we have trained facilitators who pre-conference with the students involved, which basically means that they meet with the students or students and adults potentially involved to see if they're interested in participating in restorative justice, to have their questions answered, and to kind of prepare them for being able to meet with each other. They help determine if everyone has like the right mindset for restorative justice. So when I would pre-conference, for example, working in the legal setting in DC, if I met with a young person who was not sorry about what they did and said, for example, like, yeah, I beat up that person, I'd do it again, they deserve it, and I don't care about that person at all. I would never, ever, ever, and we as a program would never, ever, ever bring that person in front of the person that was harmed by them, right? Because that's just going to cause more trauma, more harm, and that is not at all what we want to do with this process. Restorative justice processes really care about the people that have been harmed. Sometimes people say it's a victim-centered process. And so a victim or someone who has been harmed has to be willing to meet, and this has to be a helpful and healing process for them. And if the person responsible is not taking accountability, we do not move forward with restorative justice. So once the facilitators meet with everybody, help make sure that everyone has the right mindset, they actually want to do this, answers any questions, gives them an overview of the process, talks a little bit about the incident, what happened, what was the impact, what do you need to try to make this situation right, to try to repair the situation. Then they'll bring them together for what we call an RJ circle. Sometimes we use the word conference. Circle or conference can be used interchangeably. And that certified facilitator leads this process to talk about what happened, the impact of what happened, and how do we try to repair and make things right. Hopefully, at the end of that process, the participants then use that making things right question to write an agreement, which all of the people sign, and then the school actually upholds. So this whole process is confidential. We don't share out any of the private things that are said throughout the process, but that agreement is shared with parents and then with anyone who might need to know that agreement so that they can help support it. So that could mean administrators, it could mean teachers, but only with the consent of the people involved. So that's an overview of our tier 3 process. And good, I'm so glad to see that even in the chat, some people are kind of understanding the process a little bit more with this explanation. So key things about the tier 3 process. I'll just give you a moment to look at this picture. This is a kind of simulation of what that tier 3 process might look like. So what are some of the things that you notice here? And again, you don't have to put it in the chat for now, but you can just think to yourself, what do you notice about how they're sitting? What do you notice even about the body language? Or how many people are there? So in the restorative justice process, we do sit in a circle. You might notice there's no table or anything that's physically dividing us as we sit together to meet about whatever has happened. There's a trained, certified facilitator. That could be either one of our central office people, as I mentioned in the beginning, but it might also be someone who's gone through our certification program here at FCPS, who's what we call a school-based facilitator. And great question that I'm seeing in the chat. It's not only counselors who train to be facilitators. Sometimes we have teachers. I'd say the vast majority of our facilitators, our school-based facilitators, are counselors, social workers, or system of support advisors, SOSAs. We have some APs trained as well. But we found that it works best when a trained certified facilitator has a little flexibility in their schedule to be able to do this process. It can be really tough for teachers when they're teaching to then have to find a sub so that they can go meet with all of the people and then facilitate. But principals are the ones who choose at their schools who they'd like to nominate to go through our very rigorous certification process. So one thing that you can't really see in the circle, but is a very key part of our RJ process is using something called a talking piece. And I'm seeing, I guess I don't have one next to me right now, but basically it's an object that symbolizes that it's that person's turn to talk. And then we use it in a circle process. That is, we pass it around the circle to know whose turn it is to talk next. And we really kind of use typically like we go in a circle for the most part. Sometimes we might switch directions, but that way everyone very clearly knows when it's their turn to talk and they don't have to think about like, oh, I want to say something because their turn is coming. And it helps us also kind of signal whoever's holding that, we really need to listen to them. They have the floor and we really want them to share openly when they have the talking piece. Someone already mentioned that this is a voluntary process. That's voluntary from the beginning and voluntary during the process as well. So it is true. While I would say this isn't as typical in tier 3, If someone needs a moment and isn't ready to talk or doesn't want to share too much, they can pass the talking piece to the next person and we'll come back around to them. You'll see in this picture too of the what looks like a cloth with some things written on it. This is called a centerpiece, and it's something that we use in our restorative justice practices as well. It helps to create a more warm environment, and it also helps to create a more inclusive environment because not everybody feels comfortable looking at each other in the eye when they're talking. That could be for cultural reasons, it could be for neurodiversity reasons. It could be for a lot of reasons. Maybe someone's just having a bad day and they um, want to go through with the RJ process, but they just don't want to look at anybody in the moment. This gives them something to look at to still be able to participate. You'll also notice that we have things written there. Those are our 4 guidelines that we use during the RJ process. So confidentiality is a key component to restorative justice. What's said in the circle stays in the circle. Using the talking piece like we talked about, the right to pass if you don't want to share, and then speaking and listening from the heart, really speaking in an honest and open way and really listening to what the others have to share in the room. So the key questions that we ask are what happened? And the folks involved get to answer that. What was the impact of that situation on you? That impact of the situation even on others. And then as a result of that impact, what needs to happen to try to make things as right as possible? How do we repair this? Who's responsible for those repair ideas? And how do we kind of like work through that? So let's revisit that opening scenario with Alex. As we kind of start thinking about applying him and this process to that opening scenario, I'd like us to also take a little bit of time to think about what is the goal of disciplining a student. So we've said the word like school discipline a lot today, and obviously Alex needs some kind of discipline response. What he did is not okay. It is a violation of the SR&R, and Mr. Gonzalez has been really hurt by what happened. So what is the goal of disciplining a student? If we look at the original Latin or even like the Old English for discipline, we see that the word originally actually means to teach or to train, to learn. However, when we kind of use the word discipline in today's culture and in today's world, we really use the word discipline to mean to punish or to penalize. Um, and those are very different. They might be related, but they're very different definitions. And so when we think about school discipline in FCPS, we're really trying to think about learning, about teaching and training, and having students who are involved in a discipline process learn from that process and be supported as they engage in that process. And so one way that we think about this is really the difference between a more punitive mindset using kind of like that definition of discipline for that we might use in today's society versus more of a restorative mindset. So again, if we were live in person, I'd ask you to turn to a partner and kind of reflect and notice like what do you see as the differences here and kind of have a conversation about it. But I'll just go through these together, and you can kind of be thinking about what stands out to you as I go through this. So from a punitive mindset, we typically focus on the rule. What rule was broken, right? So what SR&R violations did Alex commit? Where from a restorative mindset, it's not that the rule doesn't matter, but the focus is different. What is the harm that resulted from the incident? And how was that relationship in Alex and Mr. Gonzalez's case impacted? And how is it broken even by what happened? So we're focusing on the relationship and we're focusing on the harm versus focusing on the rule. In a punitive mindset, we usually typically focus on the offending student and like what consequences do they get? What happens to them? What punishment should they get? Versus the restorative mindset really focuses on those who've been impacted. Their hurt and their needs and their voice really matters. And we want to honor that and have that very as a deeply connected part of our discipline process. Again, if you think about this from the legal point of view, when someone goes to court because they've hurt somebody else, we do not, they don't have a chance to talk to, or the victim of that crime doesn't have a chance usually to talk to the person who's responsible for that crime, to ask their questions, for them to share like what the impact has been. They might be able to share like a victim impact statement publicly, but the focus is very much not on them, but on the person who caused the harm, the person who like did a crime. So we can have a similar point of view in the school setting as well. The punitive mindset, accountability means kind of taking your medicine or getting that punishment. We want that person to be held accountable, so they need to they need to be suspended, or they need to be punished somehow so that they learn from their mistake. The restorative mindset, accountability is very, very important, but it has a different lens. Accountability means taking responsibility for your actions and then having to directly address the needs of the people who've been harmed because of those actions. And that I would say, like having a conversation with someone face to face that you have hurt actually is a lot more accountable than simply receiving a punishment. And sometimes I think about that in terms, even as myself as an adult, and maybe for you all as adults participating in this webinar, how easy or difficult is it for you when you make a mistake to apologize to the person that you've hurt, to your neighbor, to your colleague, to your family member, to really honor the impact of the harm that you've caused or the impact of the hurt that you caused, and to really take ownership and say, like, I'm so sorry for doing that. I'm not going to do that again. It's hard for us as adults, much less for kids. And I think it's a much more robust way of thinking about the word accountability. Because this process really is about bringing people together and working through things together, it really encourages honesty versus defensiveness. And really importantly, instead of outsiders determining the outcome, like an administrator, like you did this, Alex, so this is all the things that's going to happen to you. Everyone impacted determines the outcome. So in this case, Mr. Gonzalez, what he wants and what he thinks needs to happen to try to make things right, would be really, really important in Alex's discipline process. So if we take that punitive mindset and let's kind of play out like what happens to Alex and Mr. Gonzalez. If we take that punitive kind of more maybe the way we experienced schools when we were young, maybe Alex is suspended out of school for 2 days for causing harm to a staff member. When he's suspended, he misses a test and continues to fall behind in algebra. He's home alone during his suspension, so he plays video games all day. He texts his friends that he doesn't really care about the suspension or Mr. Gonzalez because the school hates him anyway. The whole class knows why he was suspended and feels awkward when he comes back to school, and some of his friends don't want to sit with him anymore because of what happened. Mr. Gonzalez doesn't know how to address his feelings of humiliation, and he just doesn't say anything to anyone. He feels really stressed teaching that class where this whole thing happened, and he avoids Alex when Alex comes back to class, and doesn't really know what to do to make it better. And so the school even offers, like, we'll just remove Alex from your class, Mr. Gonzalez, so you don't have to interact anymore. So on a scale of 1 to 10, and Mary Claire, I'm seeing your question, and I'll try to answer that at the end with the Q&A. On a scale of 1 to 10, to what extent do you think that this discipline, this punitive mindset discipline, held Alex accountable and addressed his needs and Mr. Gonzalez's needs? And you can put that in the chat. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that so many of you are saying 1 because like that this process did not really hold Alex accountable and did not really address Mr. Gonzalez's needs. Because I think in schools, this is often what we typically go to. This violation happened, he needs to be suspended, and we'll just remove the kid from class. And that way we don't have this issue again. So thank you so much for those of you who put those reflections in the chat. I agree with you. I don't think that this holds Alex very accountable, and it certainly does not meet Mr. Gonzalez's needs. What do you think Alex learned as a result of the punitive mindset? And you can put your answers in the chat there. What did he learn from this experience? And I'll just wait a few moments for those of you who want to answer to type something. Ha, yeah, how to get out of school and play video games all day. His friends don't want to be with him. It is possible he learned something to, excuse me, he learned not to do something similar again. He was inconvenienced socially and like practically in terms of missing school. So yeah, it is possible he kind of learned from his mistake. He did potentially learn consequences, like that these consequences have an impact on him. Maybe he learned he's going to do it again and just be able to be home from school. Um, okay, and yeah, maybe he learned not to do it again, but he also didn't learn as much as he could have from the situation. Great. Um, so in our scenario, Alex was suspended. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what exclusionary discipline is and what some of the consequences of that are. So exclusionary discipline is any kind of action that removes or excludes students from their usual education setting. So that does include suspensions in school and out of school. And of course, it includes expulsions as well. So there's a lot of research on exclusionary discipline and the impact that it has on students. And you're free, of course, to look up any of these studies if you'd like to read more. But there is research that shows that suspensions, rather than changing behavior for the better, they actually can drive an increase in misbehavior, both for the student who did the incident, but connecting to that third point, also for other students. And that suspensions or exclusionary discipline can really harm school climate, not just for those who are suspended, but those who aren't. They kind of see like, well, when I make a mistake, I'm sent home. I'm not welcome. I'm not part of this community. The school hates me, like Alex said. It might also lead to students to distrust and be even more defiant towards adults. When it comes to school suspension, some other statistics that we see from the Department of Education are that, and again, other studies on the impact of school suspension, students who are suspended are 2.5 times more likely to drop out of school, 2.6 times more likely to experience arrest, 4.5 times more likely to serve time in juvenile or adult correctional facilities. And I really am struck by these like two middle bullet points that repeat suspensions in middle school triple the probability of later involvement with the justice system, and that one suspension, and this is at any time in that student's life, can reduce a student's trajectory towards graduation by 20%. So I say all of this not to say that suspension is never appropriate. Sometimes it might need to be what happens. Okay. There is a place for suspension in school discipline, and it has very severe and long-lasting consequences. So we need to make sure as administrators, as parents, as people who are connected to the education system, that we are using suspensions very carefully because of the long-term impact that they can have. When it comes to being court involved, these are a bunch of the negative impacts for young people who are court involved at an early age. It can impact all of these different areas. So just wanted to highlight that as well. Having students go through the legal system can also have very long-lasting consequences for them. So while when we use exclusionary discipline, we might intend to have students learn from their mistakes, to have students change their behavior, to have enhanced safety, protect like the learning environment or the school community, to hold students accountable, we can see that the impact that it has can be quite different than what we intend. that impact of exclusionary discipline often, again, leads to those lower graduation rates, lower test scores, feelings of distrust and disconnection in the school community, and higher likelihood to be involved in the justice system. So we bring this up because we do have a growing awareness in FCPS around discipline disproportionality. It's part of our Goal 2 report, which you're welcome to look at, and there'll be an update on discipline disproportionality this year as well in this year's Goal 2 report. So discipline disproportionality occurs when students who belong to a given group are disciplined at a higher rate than students who are not a member of that group. So when, for example, if we look at the bottom paragraph, students who are economically disadvantaged or students who are boys receive more discipline referrals and even twice the rate of suspensions than peers who are not economically disadvantaged or who are not boys. We see these types of disproportionality rates with students with disabilities, multilingual learners, Black students, Hispanic students, that they all have elevated rates of suspension compared to their peers. And so when we think about those harms of exclusionary discipline, because of discipline disproportionality, which exists throughout the US, but of course we're focusing on FCPS, we can think about these students who experience discipline disproportionality are also more likely to experience the harms of exclusionary discipline. They're the ones more likely to have those long-term negative impacts. So when we think about the SR&R, this is also, again, and thank you, Nadia, for putting the link in the chat as well. Restorative justice is in the SR&R. It is a way that we encourage administrators to engage as part of their discipline process. So looking at the bottom here, looking at the top here, this highlighted piece, every incident that takes place, every discipline incident has to have some kind of behavior intervention to support the student so that they're actually learning from what happened. And restorative justice is a possible intervention that we can use at actually any level of discipline incident to support students in their learning and, again, to help them take real accountability for their actions. And I just, these are all screenshots from the SR&R. So you can see that, for level 3 responses, restorative justice is explicitly named as an intervention that can support students with even higher level incidents. And we can see here that restorative justice conferences are explicitly used as different interventions or advised to be used as different interventions. Without suspensions from school. So administrators sometimes use restorative justice as like alongside suspensions from school, but they can also use it instead of, and it's kind of up to the administrator and the situation. So again, thinking about that tier 3 process of the referral or the conflict, the referral, the pre-conference meeting together, and then having an agreement, let's think about Alex and Mr. Gonzalez again. So now this is a restorative example of what might have happened if they went a restorative route instead of that punitive route. Alex talks to his assistant principal, who asks him if he'd be interested in a restorative justice circle with Mr. Gonzalez. He says he's not sure, but he's open to it, and he actually does feel bad about what happened. A central office facilitator pre-conferences or meets with Alex. He decides in that conversation that he does want to meet with Mr. Gonzalez. He does want to apologize and hear from Mr. Gonzalez about what he can do to try to fix the relationship and the impact of the incident. Mr. Gonzalez also pre-conferences with the facilitator. He says he really wants to talk to Alex. He doesn't understand why would Alex do this. He thought they had a good relationship, and he really hopes they can find a way to move forward. So they do a restorative justice circle, and this is the agreement that they come up with. Alex apologizes face-to-face to Mr. Gonzalez. He answers Mr. Gonzalez's questions about why he took that picture to begin with. Mr. Gonzalez gets the chance to share how the picture made him feel and how uncomfortable he's been with the whole class since. Alex agrees that he's going to meet with Mr. Gonzalez after school for the next 2 weeks to help him practice using that technology that he was making fun of Mr. Gonzalez for using it incorrectly. Alex also agrees he's going to create a PowerPoint on the positive and negative uses of technology since he used technology inappropriately. He says that he's going to talk to his friends that he texted about this mistake that he made and try to make things right verbally with those friends. He agrees to follow the phone storage at his school. If he had been following the phone storage policy, phone storage policy, the situation wouldn't have happened either. And Mr. Ooh, Alex and Mr. Gonzalez agreed to have a fresh start. So now, when Alex goes back to class, he has a clear plan of action for what he's going to do to try to make things right. He's being held accountable for his actions. He's doing what Mr. Gonzalez wants, the person who's been most impacted, and they get a chance to restart and kind of have a reset to their relationship. So on a scale of 1 to 10, to what extent do you think that this discipline, the restorative lens of discipline, held Alex accountable and addressed his and Mr. Gonzalez's needs? And you can put those answers in the chat. Great. And it's okay if you don't agree with me or if you don't think it's a 10 out of 10, any answer is fine. But I'm appreciating that most of them are on the higher end. And so, right, so we see that this restorative process really can lead to healing, especially for people who've been harmed, and to real accountability for the people who've caused the harm. And so, uh, sorry, I'm just thinking about time. Let's go ahead and ask this in the chat again too. So what do you think Alex learned as a result of the restorative mindset? What do you think he learned from this experience that he had participating in the RJ circle? And you can put your answers in the chat. He learned to problem solve. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully, it looks like he learned to address his mistakes. It's possible to have a fresh start after a mistake. Accountability, compassion. Maybe he even learned some empathy, right? Actually having to hear the impact of his actions from the person who was most impacted by them. He has a key to solve conflict in a positive way. Yes. Right. Yes. Why his behavior was wrong, the impact that it had on the person, how to make concrete amends. Excellent. So I want to highlight two other examples, and then we'll kind of look at next steps and have time for a Q&A. So here's a situation, an example situation from third grade. Liam and Noah are in third grade. Liam becomes enraged during recess after Noah accidentally trips him. Liam kicks Noah's backpack, destroying a handmade science fair model inside that Noah had worked on for weeks. So we're imagining that instead of that punitive process, again, they go through a restorative process. And as part of that restorative process, Liam gets to apologize to Noah face to face. He was really embarrassed when he tripped and fell in front of everyone, and he really lost self-control. That's why he kicked the backpack and why he did what he did. Noah explains how hard he worked on the science fair model and how upset he was when it was broken. Liam agrees to spend 2 afternoons helping Noah rebuild that model, so making right the thing that was broken. And Noah agrees to try a breathing strategy when he starts to feel upset. That's part of kind of thinking like, how do we prevent this from happening again? Maybe Noah needs to amplify his toolbox of things that he can do when he starts to feel really angry so he doesn't become so destructive. So that's an example of how this might play out in third grade. And we'll give one more, like a high school example. So in this situation, Sasha and Samira are in 10th grade. Samira is going to a school dance with Sasha's ex-boyfriend. Sasha posted on Instagram about Samira, saying that she wanted to fight her after school and calling her slurs related to her religion, ethnicity, and citizenship status. So really saying some very hurtful and harmful things on this Instagram post. They decide to do restorative justice. And as a part of the agreement, and through this restorative experience, Samira shares, she doesn't really want an apology, actually. What she really wants is for Sasha to leave her alone at school and to never say the slurs that she said again. Samira explains some of her family's story and why Sasha said was so hurtful to her. Sasha then hears about the impact of her actions on Samira and Samira's parents, who also participated in the circle. So, in this case, because it's a bit higher level, we do have parents involved. She didn't understand how hurtful or like to what extent that language, that hurtful language was. Sasha and Samira, while they're not friends, they do agree to keep things cordial at the school. Sasha agrees to write about the harm of hate speech for an upcoming research project in class. And Sasha's parents agree to take Sasha to do community service with a local organization that helps refugee families over winter break. So she is making things right, not just with Samira directly, but also kind of showing that she's trying to make things right in terms of um, addressing the community even that was impacted and how she's going to be committed to her further learning around the harm that she caused. So those are some three really examples. And actually, while I made those examples up, they are really based on examples that we do in schools. They're very similar to real situations that have involved real FCPS students. So let's get very practical for a few moments. And I'll try to move through this as quickly as possible so we can do some Q&A. How can schools use Tier 3 RJ? They can use it preventatively and as part of a discipline incident, like we talked about. You do have school-based facilitators that can handle some conflicts at your school, and then all of your schools have a central office facilitator as well. School-based facilitators, they handle kind of lower level, more everyday conflicts and infractions, where central office team is going to handle anything higher level, anything that has like many participants, anything that touches the world of discrimination, harassment, hate speech, slurs, group assaults. Again, those higher level things, that's what central office does. And just wanted to show you some of the feedback that we've gotten. So at the end of every RJ circle, we do ask participants to fill out an evaluation. This is data from middle and high school participants from last year. So this is maybe about 300 to 400 people's worth of data. And you can see that overwhelmingly, participants feel like they are satisfied with the outcome. This was a good way to resolve their conflict. The circle process was fair. They felt heard. Those are very, very high satisfaction rates with our process. And we can see some student responses even because we do ask an open-ended question about what did you find most helpful. I really love this. Where is the question? Oh, the third one, we can be friends again and use a word if we're getting offended. So these two friends were, going at it, but now they came up with like, I'm going to use a signal word to tell you you're like crossing my personal boundary and I'm starting to get offended to help hopefully them escalating from having that specific conflict again. We did have a study on FCPS published last year that found very similar evaluation or very similar results to our personal evaluation data, which is great. So again, people who participate in our process really appreciate the process and are really glad that they participated in it. So in terms of what you can do next, we really encourage you to use Tier 3 RJ proactively when there's a brewing conflict. If you are school staff and you hear about a brewing conflict, encourage your administrator to make an RJ referral. Or if your student is involved in an incident and you know that some tension is going on, talk to your administrator and see if they can make this RJ referral so that they can get involved. You can connect with your school-based facilitator, with your central office facilitator to find out more. You might even use similar questions around like what happened, what was the impact, how do we make things right in your family as things come up in your family life. And of course, if you have any questions, and thanks Nadia for putting them in our email addresses in the chat. Please reach out. We love talking about restorative justice practices and would love to support you. Okay. So I have less time than I thought, but would like to open up these last 14 minutes or so for Q&A.
Thank you, Anna. That was fantastic. I will read. We have 4 questions. The first one says, has New Zealand seen progressive change by having this?
That is a great question and one that I don't know enough about, honestly, to answer. I know that they have been using RJ as part of their juvenile system for quite a while now, and are really kind of studied and respected for their use. And they do have an indigenous population, the Maori people, that again, some of these restorative justice practices come from originally. And so I think that kind of helped with some of the buy-in towards implementing restorative justice so broadly on a system level. But it's a great question, and I need to do some more reading because it's been a while since I studied this.
Thank you.
Mhm.
The next one says, I would love to hear about how Tier 2 groups work with students and attendance issues.
Great. So, tier two groups, we encourage like the MTSS teams at schools to work with a tier two trained person in a school. We offer tier two trainings regularly. This year, a lot to clinical staff, counselors, social workers, and and others who really have that space to in their schedule to be able to meet with students weekly or biweekly. So we would use data to choose students who are having challenges with attendance or with tardies to put them together in a tier two group where they connect with each other a little more first and then really start doing some thinking and collaboration and problem solving around for attendance, what's around their attendance issues and how can they together as a community support each other to help them get to school on time or to class on time. So if you'd like to know more, please reach out to me or to Chris Sang, and we can talk about or help you figure out who's been tier two trained in your school community and like support the implementation of tier two circles for attendance if you'd like that.
Thank you. The next question is, how can a family liaison help with RJ?
So I think family liaisons can help with restorative justice in several ways. Um, One is really as you're liaisoning with families, especially like to help them understand the restorative justice process, to help them understand even proactively that this is something that can be part of a discipline response in FCPS and that we really value this way of supporting students as they learn from their mistakes. And so I think that kind of proactive information sharing would be really, really helpful. And then sometimes very practically, family liaisons sometimes help support um tier three referrals, like those circles that we've been talking about today with school-based facilitators or with central office team as translators. And that can be a really practical way to support as well.
Thank you. Next question says, what would be the best way to limit school suspensions or how schools should handle that better?
Right. So that is a really great question. I think that Chris and I, spend a lot of time offering trainings and kind of educating administrators, educating families, educating teachers, and training them in these restorative justice practices that we've been talking about. And so, one of the best ways to reduce discipline disproportionality and the use of suspensions is by having robust tier one practices, actually. So I know we've been talking about tier three a lot, the conflict circles, but we have seen, and the research shows a real connection between students who feel really connected to each other in their classrooms and to their school community. When that kind of connection and relationship goes up, the discipline incidents go down. And so And we're seeing that in real time in some of our schools that are using tier one practices throughout their whole school communities. So I think that is something that can really help suspensions and exclusionary discipline more broadly. And then again, we do a lot of education with administrators that restorative justice is an intervention. It is really supportive to students' learning. It is real accountability. And I would argue it's more accountable than simply punishing a student. So, I think the administrator's side, we really do a lot of education on. And that's why I'm so glad to be here now, because we really want to do a lot more parent education so that they understand parent and guardian education. They understand what this process is and how supportive it can be, and true like accountability, true centering of what people who've been harmed feel and want and need. Um, because I think sometimes parents, when their students are involved in a discipline incident, and they're invited to participate in restorative justice, some parents might say no because they're kind of trying to process that the process that their student is involved in a discipline incident and trying to understand what restorative justice is at the same time. And that can be super overwhelming and a lot. And so I understand hesitation from the parent or family side for engaging in this process. But that's why I'm hoping through these webinars, we can have more and more families understand how helpful and powerful this process can be, so that should one of their young people be involved in a situation where restorative justice is offered, they might be more likely to use it.
Thank you. Next question. Is there data on if participants in RJ repeat offend?
Great. There is data on this. We currently do not track recidivism data in FCPS. It has been tracked in the past. It gets a bit complex with in terms of how to actually be able to follow a student over time for us. The AAP program that I shared, the connection, the diversion program that we have where we use restorative justice with kids committing crimes who are first-time offenders, they do track recidivism rates there. And their recidivism rate is less than 10%, somewhere around like 6%, I think. You can look it up on their uh, oh my gosh, what is that called?
Website?
Yeah, the report that they do at the end of the year, um, the annual report. That is a very low recidivism rate. So I think if this is something that you're interested in, it is, I don't have the stats memorized, and so I don't want to like give inaccurate information. But a young person who commits a crime and gets like locked up has a certain recidivism rate. A student who experiences restorative justice is way less likely to repeat that same crime. And so the recidivism rates really in the legal system are very powerful in terms of the effectiveness of restorative justice. And I'm not sure what they are in the education setting nationwide. There are a lot of researchers that do this kind of study, and I'm sure that those rates exist, but I just don't know what they are off the top of my head. But it would be something, and it is something that I'm interested in tracking in FCPS specifically.
Thank you very much. The next question is, um, who is called in to support the students and families
Mhm.
for the facilitated circles if they speak a different language than the ones from the school or the people facilitating?
Yeah, great question. We work, thankfully, FCPS has interpreters readily available, and they are extremely responsive, and they're able to find support for really any language needs that come up with students in Fairfax County. And so we have a request form that we fill out, and we can have an interpreter supporting those pre-conferences, like the initial phone calls to parents, the pre-conference meetings, and then of course in-person interpretation for the circle itself. So I'd typically say that pre-conferences or the initial meetings are usually like initial introductions on about restorative justice and scheduling are typically on the phone. So we have interpreters who help us on the phone, and then they physically come to schools to meet with parents or whoever needs that interpretation support. Um, for pre-conference and then for the final circle as well.
Thank you. And the last question we have, how can I find out who is the trained RJ person at my child's school?
Great question. The best way to do that would be to talk to your administrators. Yes, and ask them like, who is the certified tier 3 person, and can I please connect with them because I'd like to, for whatever reason that you'd like to connect. So for parents, we really want to kind of help encourage the relationship that you have with your school communities. So the best way to find out who your school facilitator is by reaching out to the administrators.
Awesome. Is there any other questions we have time for, I think, one more question if there's any
Sure.
lingering ones. So I'll give it a few seconds to see if anyone wants to ask anything.